It's day 3 of the fallout from the Helsinki summit. The questions still keep coming about exactly what went on behind closed doors between Trump and Putin. Of course, one outcome we do know is that possible visit to Washington by the Russian president that we learned about today. But almost everything else, that's a mystery. As we showed you before the break, here's what former CIA Chief of Russia Operations Steve Hall posted yesterday on Twitter. He said, from a counterintelligence perspective, something is going on behind the scenes. Before Helsinki, I was less sure. Post-Helsinki, I feel sick. Steve Hall joins me now, along with Rolf Moet Larsen, like Steve, a former CIA officer who also spent a good deal of time in Moscow. Steve, you choose your words carefully. What makes you feel sick?
You know, before the Helsinki summit, I was not prepared to go to the darkest corner in the room and say, there is compromising information on Donald Trump. But then after I saw him together with Vladimir Putin, the murderer, the person who has done, the standard litany of things that we're now all familiar with, and I saw Donald Trump treat him in a fashion that is just inexplicable. The only conclusion that I can come to is, and I would disagree with one of your former guests, I think there is information and data out there that implies that there is indeed compromising information that Vladimir Putin has on Donald Trump. Look, why else would he treat him this way? Donald Trump has been pretty tough with the Chinese. There's an impending trade war. He's been pretty tough with Rocket Man when they were comparing the size of their buttons. So it's not as though Donald Trump has any problem being tough with people. The question is, why not be tough with a guy like Vladimir Putin? And the only explanation that I can have is that he is concerned that the compromising information that Putin has on him will get out, because everybody else he treats very, very differently. That's kind of what sickens me.
Rolf, do you have that sense of sickness as well?
I would say that I agree with Steve's description of the symptoms, but I'm not sure I understand the cause. In other words, I'm not prepared to go there in terms of saying that the president is influenced directly by any compromising material the Russians have. But what I would add to Steve's commentary is that in a way it doesn't matter. The fact is that we cannot proceed with any realistic expectation that we can improve relations with the Russians if the president is not prepared to take a hard line with Vladimir Putin. I mean, his entire national security community is essentially in opposition to him and waging this really horrible struggle to watch to both support the president, who they serve, as well as their conviction that we need to confront the Russians. And as a matter of fact, if you look at the decades of history between the U.S. and Russia in the Cold War to today, I don't think there's ever been a period where we've been able to achieve any progress in relations, except when we've been tough with one another. We have to remember that when President Ronald Reagan confronted the Russians in the beginning, it was from the approach of Russia, Soviet Union representing an evil empire. That, in fact, was a necessary precondition for the progress that was made with President Gorbachev. After that, the hard line faded into the relationship that they were able to afford. So I think if President Trump believes that he can develop a friendship with Putin that's based not on reality, as his intelligence community and law enforcement community and policy community sees it, he's not only deluding himself, President Putin will not respect him for it.
Steve, it does seem like, I mean, everything about the Russians, people have always said is, it's you come at them from a position of strength. They respect strength. I just kept wondering what is going through, and it's impossible to know, but what is going through Vladimir Putin's mind when he's standing on that stage listening to the president kind of go through all his greatest hits of all the things Vladimir Putin has no doubt read transcripts of the president saying before about his election victory and no collusion and all these things. I mean, the president is not a great poker player. He seems to give away everything that is actually in his head.
Sure, undoubtedly a very weak performance, and I would agree with Rolf that there's no reason not to go at the Russians tough. And then the question again rises: well, then why isn't he doing that? And to get to Rolf's other question that many have asked, well, so what is this compromise? What is this information? The salacious tapes, all of that stuff, I don't think that concerns Trump. I don't think that concerns his base. But go back and look at the finances. Donald Trump has been doing business, and his organization has been doing business by his son's own admission, and if you go back and look at the records, for years. What is the most important thing for Donald Trump? Not being a rich man. It's the ego satisfaction. It's being the tycoon. It's being the biggest, best deal maker of all. And to have somebody like Vladimir Putin who can say, you know what, guess who was behind that? Guess who bailed you out? Guess who helped you out via Deutsche Bank and other mechanisms when you were really having trouble? That was the Russians. That's what they hold over him. That is Donald Trump's vulnerability. And that is why he is not being tough with the Russians.
Rolf, two just quick things. One, when the president says nobody's been tougher on Russia than he has, his supporters point to there were some Russian mercenaries were killed in a battle in Syria by U.S. forces, the bombing of an airfield in Syria, supplying weapons to Ukraine. Do you buy that nobody's been tougher on Russia than Donald Trump? And also, I mentioned at the top of the program, the Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein today said that the attacks from Russia are persistent, pervasive, and ongoing, meant to undermine America's democracy. How serious do you take that warning?
I have to come to the reluctant conclusion that the president is either delusional in ignoring all the advice he's getting from his key advisors about what the Russians are really doing, continually casting renewed doubts, and then trying to, in a way, convince himself that he's being tough by making these statements that he's the toughest president, when that is just so patently ridiculous, frankly. I don't want to sound disrespectful. But I think that raises another key question. When you watch the summit, the contrast between President Trump and Putin could not have been clearer. President Putin also adopted an unusual, I would say, approach or demeanor in which he became very bitter. Many of his comments were very bitter. He offered these two ridiculous proposals that he had to understand were completely unacceptable to the entire U.S. national security establishment in calling for the Mueller investigation to be interviewed in Russia. It's a slap in the face of the Mueller investigation. The only person that would appeal to in the United States, the only person I could think of, is the president himself.
Yeah. And it did appeal to him, and the president seemed to, said on the stage, frankly, that it was
He said it was incredible. He said it was a great idea.
Right, twice he referred to that.
That's absolutely incredible.
Yeah, Rolf Mowat, Larson, Steve Hall, thank you so much. Really fascinating.